The echo of gunfire shattered the mansion's silence. Smoke curled through the marble halls, the air heavy with burnt powder and betrayal. Michael Caruso froze, his heart pounding like the ticking clock on the blood-streaked wall. Vittorio De Luca's body lay sprawled across the rug, the crimson stain spreading beneath him like an empire collapsing. Michael whispered, "It wasn't supposed to end like this." The chandelier above flickered, casting trembling shadows across the room. A single phone buzzed nearby, Vittorio's last message still glowing. "It's done. The king is dead." Michael's pulse throbbed in his ears. He stepped closer, drawn by both fear and duty, his boots leaving faint prints in the blood. Somewhere in the distance, footsteps echoed. The storm outside roared louder. Someone else was here. He raised his gun, every breath laced with dread. But when he turned toward the grand staircase, he saw a familiar silhouette. "Elena?" he whispered. Her silence was more terrifying than the gunfire. The storm refused to die. Police sirens wailed faintly beyond the mansion's gates, their blue lights bleeding through the curtains. Michael paced the study, hands trembling, memories clashing like shards of glass. Vittorio's empire would now devour itself, he muttered. "They'll come for me next." The portraits on the wall seemed to stare back with silent judgment. He poured whiskey, its burn unable to drown the guilt rising in his throat. The rain struck harder, as if the heavens themselves condemned him. Somewhere below, the sound of a door creaked, too deliberate to be the wind. Fear sharpened into instinct. He holstered his gun and whispered, "Who's there?" The answer came not in words, but in silence thick enough to choke. Sleep refused to come. Michael sat by the window, lightning etching scars of light across his face. The world outside felt alien, stripped of loyalty. He whispered, "How many died for a lie?" His reflection stared back like a stranger wearing his sins. He remembered the oath he took, to protect the family, to uphold the empire. But tonight, the family was dead, and the empire was bleeding. His mind replayed every order he obeyed without question. Each face, each scream, each ghost. The rain blurred the world beyond the glass, just as his conscience blurred right and wrong. In the distance, a car engine started. Someone was leaving, or waiting. The night no longer promised rest, only reckoned. The next morning crawled in gray and lifeless. Michael met Daniel Voss at the old pier, waves slapping against rusted iron. Daniel's voice carried urgency. Vittorio's death wasn't random. Someone close pulled the trigger. Michael's jaw tightened. "Who?" Daniel looked away. "You won't like the answer." The wind howled, tearing through their silence. Michael stared at the water, his reflection breaking with each ripple. The truth was coming. Heavy, inevitable, he felt it pressing against his chest like a loaded gun. "Find me proof," he said, his tone hollow. Daniel nodded, but didn't meet his eyes. The tide whispered secrets the world wasn't ready to hear. Night returned with vengeance. Michael knelt before Vittorio's grave beneath the old chapel's arch. Candles flickered in defiance of the wind. He whispered, "I'll find who did this." The stone felt cold against his palm, like the truth he feared to touch. Elena's absence gnawed at him. Her silence screamed betrayal. He drew a blade and pressed it lightly against his palm, letting blood drip onto the soil. "For honor," he said, voice breaking. Thunder cracked overhead, a vow sealed by stormlight. Somewhere beyond the graveyard wall, a shadow moved, watching. The past wasn't finished with him yet. The grand hall was filled with whispered conversations, but the silence in the air was deafening. The Mafia Council had gathered. Michael Caruso entered, every eye turning. He could feel the weight of their gaze, but his pulse hammered louder than any words. Vittorio's death was a wound that no one dared to touch. but every one of them wanted a piece of the empire. "It's a matter of power," Marco Santini said, his voice dripping with authority. Michael's hand tightened around the chair, but he kept his face neutral. "You think the king's dead and you've inherited his throne?" Michael's voice cut through the tension, but the council was unshaken. "No one will control this empire like he did. Not even you," his words echoed, sharp and unforgiving. Betrayal was no longer a shadow in the room. It was the very air they breathed. Michael knew he wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a threat. But in the depths of his mind, a question lingered. Was he a player in this game or a pawn? The rain had finally ceased by the time Michael stepped out of the meeting, but the air was thick with unresolved tension. He walked through the alleyway, his mind clouded with the weight of the council's words. A figure stepped from the shadows. "Daniel Voss? They know you're a threat now. It's only a matter of time." Michael paused, his eyes narrowing. "I've been a threat my whole life," he replied, his voice low. But Daniel's eyes were filled with something Michael couldn't read. Fear or pity, maybe both. "They're hunting you, Michael. You don't understand how deep this goes." The wind shifted, carrying the promise of danger. "If you want to survive, you need to know who your real enemies are." Daniel turned, his coat flaring behind him. "I'll be in touch." As he disappeared into the night, Michael stood frozen, the weight of his words settling in. The stakes had shifted, and now the hunt was on. Michael's instincts flared as he entered the warehouse. It smelled of rust and forgotten secrets. The clang of metal echoed in the distance. From the shadows, Marco Santini stepped into view, the enforcer. His presence suffocated the space. "I hear you've been asking questions, Michael," Marco said, his voice calm, but every syllable carrying weight. Michael stood taller, the air around them crackling with hostility. "I'm looking for the truth," Michael shot back, his fingers brushing the gun holstered at his side. Marco's lips twisted into a grim smile. "Truth has a price." Marco took a slow step forward. The tension thickened. Michael's heart raced, but his expression never wavered. "If you want the truth," Marco added, his voice dropping to a whisper, "you might not survive it." The warehouse seemed to close in on Michael. He was trapped, but that was the way it had always been, never an escape. The sun had risen higher, casting a golden hue over the city. Michael sat across from Elena Caruso in a small cafe, the sound of coffee cups clinking against porcelain. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Elena said softly, her eyes steady but filled with something darker. "Regret, perhaps. Vittorio made enemies you couldn't even imagine. The empire he built isn't just falling, it's rotting from the inside." Michael clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "And you're just telling me this now?" Elena looked away as if searching for something in the distance. "I tried to warn you before, but you never listened." Her voice softened. "The empire isn't a family. It's a machine, and machines don't care about loyalty." Michael's gaze hardened. "So what now? You tell me how to fix this." Elena's eyes met his, full of unspoken truths. "I can show you where to start, but you have to be ready for what's coming." She stood, leaving him to grapple with her words. Night had returned, and the weight of the day hung heavily on Michael's shoulders. He stood in front of the old church, his mind racing with what Elena had said. Betrayal, danger, and survival had all become tangled in his thoughts. He had a choice to make. He could walk away, let the empire collapse, or he could risk everything to bring the truth to light. His hand hovered over the door of the church. Behind him, Marco Santini's warning echoed in his mind. "If you want the truth, you might not survive it." But Michael wasn't afraid of death anymore. It was the living he feared. He pushed the door open and stepped into the darkness of the church. "I'm done waiting," he muttered to himself. The chase was on, and it would be a race against time. The evening air was still, the silence almost comforting after the chaos of the last few days. Michael sat across from Elena Caruso in the small, dimly lit room. the tension between them palpable. "You're not the only one who's been hurt by this empire," she said, her voice quiet, measured. Michael studied her, his eyes searching for any hint of insincerity. "I don't need your sympathy," he replied, though the words felt hollow even to him. Elena's fingers trembled slightly as she placed a glass of whiskey in front of him. "You're not the only one who's lost everything," she repeated. The air thickened, and Michael felt the weight of her gaze on him. She wasn't just speaking to him anymore. She was speaking of herself, of her own pain. For a moment, he almost believed her. But then the briefest flicker in her eyes, something hidden beneath the calm surface, made his heart race. Something wasn't right. Was she really on his side, or was she playing a deeper game? The quiet hum of the city outside was drowned by the silence inside the apartment. Michael and Elena had spoken little after their last exchange. The weight of unsaid words hung heavy. Elena finally broke the silence. "I never wanted this life for you," she said, her voice shaky. "But you're in too deep now. There's no way out." Michael's heart clenched. "I've always known that," he replied, his voice low, almost tired. He reached for her hand across the table, an unspoken understanding passing between them. "What do we do now?" Elena's eyes softened for a moment, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We survive together." But something in her voice, in the way she avoided his gaze, made Michael pause. Was this the truth, or another lie buried beneath a promise? The next day, Michael found himself in an old diner, sitting across from Daniel Voss, who had always been a rival. Their conversation was strained, like two wolves sizing each other up. "You think you're going to take down the empire, Michael?" Daniel asked, his voice low and cynical. "You've been part of this world for too long. You are this world." Michael leaned forward, his anger rising. "I'm nothing like them," he snapped, but Daniel only laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You're kidding yourself. We all make our choices. This life doesn't choose us, we choose it." The words hit harder than expected. Michael's breath caught. Was he really any different from the monsters he fought against? Daniel leaned back, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "You can never escape the darkness in you, Michael. You just have to learn to live with it." Michael felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Was this the truth he didn't want to admit? Michael had trusted her. He thought they were on the same side. But as the door slammed shut behind him, everything shattered. Elena stood there, gun in hand, her face cold and detached. "Elena, what the hell is this?" Michael demanded, his heart hammering in his chest. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, her eyes locked on his with a chilling finality. "It's over, Michael." The words hit him like a slap. Betrayal. It stung, not just in his chest, but deep in his soul. The woman he had trusted more than anyone had played him like a fool. The gun glinted under the low light, and Michael could see the truth in her eyes. She wasn't just working with the enemy. She was the enemy. "I was always loyal to the family, Michael," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed her. "But you never understood what loyalty really means." The gunshot rang out, echoing in his ears. The world felt distant, as if Michael were watching from far away. Blood soaked through his shirt, but the pain seemed secondary to the ache in his chest. He had never felt so alone. As he stumbled into the alley, the truth began to settle like a weight. Elena had used him. She had always been playing a part. The betrayal was no longer just about the mafia. It was about everything he had believed in. His life, his mission, his loyalty. All of it was a lie. With each step, he realized there was no turning back. The empire had fallen, but it was not the death of the king that had broken him. It was the loss of everything he once held true. He clenched his fist, swearing that he would get answers. He didn't know what the next move was, but he would not let her or anyone else tear him down. This wasn't over. Not yet. The night was heavy with silence, the stillness of a world shattered. Michael sat in his car, the engine ticking as it cooled, but his mind burned with the weight of what he had just learned. His body felt like a hollow shell, the betrayal still fresh gnawing at him. He stared at the empty street, the street light casting long shadows across the pavement. His thoughts replayed everything. Elena's words, the moments of quiet tenderness, the look in her eyes as she pulled the trigger. "I trusted you," he whispered to the empty air. His fingers gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white with rage and sorrow. Slowly, he began to piece together the puzzle. Something didn't add up. Elena wasn't the only one playing a game. Someone else had been pulling the strings all along. The truth was hidden in plain sight, a familiar face, a lie I'd never seen coming. The empire wasn't just crumbling. It had been engineered to fall. And now Michael had to uncover who had orchestrated it all. But where did he start? Who could he trust now? The past crashed into the present like a tidal wave. Michael closed his eyes, and the memories rushed forward. He remembered Vittorio De Luca's words, his promises, and the way they had shaped his life. "This is our family, protected at all costs." But Michael had never known the full truth. The betrayal had been deeper than he thought. As he stood before the old family estate, the memories mingled with the present. The sound of Vittorio's laughter echoed in his ears, but now it was tainted with something darker. Elena had been right there, playing her part all along. But how much had she known? How much had she been involved in the master plan? The pieces fit together now. This wasn't just about loyalty. This was about control, about manipulating everyone in the family for a greater, darker purpose. His chest tightened as the realization hit him. He had been just another pawn. The people he trusted the most were the ones who had betrayed him. But the truth about Vittorio and the empire was still incomplete. The shadows of the past were finally coming to light, and they were darker than anything he had imagined. Michael stood in the dimly lit hallway, the door to the private study creaking open. Inside, Daniel Voss waited. Michael's heart pounded as he faced him. The man who had always been an enigma. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Michael's voice cracked. Daniel remained calm, leaning against the desk with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "You really think you can bring this empire down? It was never meant to last, Michael." The words hit harder than any punch. Michael's fists clenched, but he didn't move. "You were all in on it," Michael said, his breath heavy with anger. "You were the one pulling the strings." Daniel straightened, his gaze piercing. "I wasn't pulling the strings. I was just watching the show. You're in deeper than you know. This was always going to happen." Michael felt the walls closing in. There was no escape from this. The truth was worse than he had imagined. Daniel had been right there, part of the plan all along. His betrayal wasn't a surprise. It was inevitable. But now Michael understood. He was part of something much larger than himself. The real enemy had been right in front of him, and now it was too late. The truth hit like a punch to the gut. Vittorio De Luca, the man Michael had trusted more than anyone, had never been the mastermind. The real power behind the empire had been a shadow, hidden in plain sight. "You never really knew, did you?" Daniel asked, his voice dripping with amusement. "Vittorio was just a figurehead. The true power? It's been with someone else the whole time?" Michael froze, every muscle in his body locking up. "Who?" he demanded, his voice barely a whisper. Daniel smiled. "Your father." The words hung in the air, heavier than any weapon. The world Michael had built his life on shattered in an instant. His own blood, his own family, had been the real puppeteer all along. The lines between friend and foe blurred. His own father had orchestrated the empire's rise and fall. Michael stumbled back, his mind reeling from the revelation. Everything he had fought for, Everything he had believed in was a lie. Michael stood alone in the dark, the weight of the world pressing down on him. He had spent so many years fighting for something that had never been real. His father, Vittorio, Daniel, all of them. They had been playing a game, one that he never understood. The truth was clear now, but it was a bitter pill to swallow. So this was the truth all along, Michael muttered, his voice hoarse. The empire, the family, everything he had ever known, it was all a facade, a carefully constructed lie. His hands trembled as he wiped the blood from his shirt, the marks of betrayal still fresh on his skin. He had nothing left, but in that emptiness something sparked. A new clarity, a new purpose. He had been wrong, but now he had a choice. The truth had destroyed him, but it had also freed him. He wasn't just the son of a king, or the pawn in their game. He was his own man, and now he would take control. The game had changed, and it was time to play by his rules. The air was thick, charged with the kind of silence that precedes chaos. Michael stood in the shadow of the old mansion, the echoes of his own footsteps the only sound as he moved towards the entrance. The night was colder now, the wind biting through his jacket, as if reminding him that time was running out. His heart beat in sync with the distant thunder, growing louder as he approached. The world had narrowed down to this moment. The final confrontation, the truth laid bare. The last time he stepped into this house, everything had seemed certain. But now, nothing was what it seemed. His father, the empire, the betrayal. It was all coming to an end tonight. Michael's breath caught as he reached for the door. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about redemption, about understanding who he was in this world. But what if, even now, he was just another pawn in someone else's game? The answer awaited inside. The door creaked open, revealing a figure in the shadows. Vittorio De Luca stood before him, older, worn by the years, but still carrying the weight of the empire. "You've come for the throne, Michael?" he asked, his voice surprisingly calm. Michael's blood boiled, but he kept his gaze steady. "I came for the truth." Vittorio's lips curled into a slight knowing smile. "The truth? Truth? You've been running from it your whole life. Your entire existence has been shaped by my decisions." The words cut deeper than any blade. "You think this is all about loyalty? It's about survival," Vittorio continued. "You think you can bring down everything I've built with your righteous rage? You're nothing without this empire." Michael's fists clenched. "I'm not a puppet, father. Not anymore." Their words, heavy with years of silence and resentment, hung between them. The storm outside raged louder, a reflection of the storm inside. It was no longer just about a battle for control. It was about destroying a legacy, a life, a lie. A shot rang out, the loud crack of gunfire splitting the air. Elena Caruso fell to the floor, the blood pooling around her. Michael's heart stopped as he rushed to her side. "Elena!" he shouted, his hands shaking as he tried to stem the flow of blood. But she reached up, her fingers trembling, touching his face. "It's too late for me," she whispered, her voice faint. "You have to finish this for both of us." Michael's eyes blurred with tears as he held her in his arms, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had trusted her, loved her, and now she was gone. The cost of truth was higher than he ever imagined. She had been a casualty of a game he didn't even know he was playing. He closed his eyes, the sound of her fading heartbeat like the final toll of a bell. "I'll make them pay," he promised, his voice hoarse with pain. But even as he said it, part of him wondered if he could ever truly be free of this world. The air was thick with fury, grief, and a relentless desire for justice. Michael stood face to face with Vittorio De Luca, who was no longer his father. He was just another enemy to be vanquished. "You always were weak, Michael," Vittorio sneered, his voice full of contempt. "You can't kill what's already dead." Michael raised his gun, every muscle in his body taut with determination. "I am not killing you," Michael replied, his voice cold and steady. "I'm ending what you started." The storm outside raged louder as their eyes locked. A battle of wills, of ideologies, of blood. Michael's finger tightened on the trigger. "You will never have control over me again," Michael said, the words carrying a weight of finality. The gunshot echoed, reverberating in the stillness. The truth had been laid bare, and now Michael was free. The price had been steep, but the Empire was no longer his prison. The storm had passed, but Michael's mind was still clouded with the weight of what he had just done. He stood on the rooftop of the mansion, the city sprawling below him. His hands were covered in blood, but he didn't feel the same. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only the rawness of what had transpired. He had lost his father. He had lost his father. But in their absence, something had awakened in him, a sense of clarity, of purpose. This was the truth, Michael whispered to himself, his voice steady now, though his heart was still heavy. The Empire was no longer his burden to carry. The world would never be the same, but neither would he. He had taken his freedom, but the cost had been high. Now all that remained was the future, a future that was his to shape, free from the chains of his past. The silence was suffocating. The storm had passed, but its remnants lingered in the air. Michael stood alone in the open courtyard of the mansion, the early morning light creeping slowly over the horizon. The once imposing structure now seemed fragile, like a tomb for everything he had lost. His chest rose and fell with each breath, but the weight of the past few days still sat heavy on his heart. His hands, once steady, now trembled with the realization of what he had done. There had been no victor in the battle, just the heavy cost of truth and sacrifice. Elena's face, her smile, flashed through his mind. He'd failed her. His father, the Empire, the bloodshed, it had all led him here, to this desolate calm. He had survived the chaos. But at what cost? What remained was a hollow victory, a life shattered by the pieces of his past. The quiet was deafening, and all that Michael could do was stand there, contemplating what had been lost forever. Michael walked through the abandoned halls, the echoes of his footsteps reminding him of the past. He could still hear Elena's laughter, feel her warmth, but it was all memory now. Was it worth it? He asked himself, his voice barely above a whisper. The question had haunted him ever since he pulled the trigger. The Empire, the power, the revenge, they all seemed so meaningless now. He had wanted justice, but what had he really gained? The taste of victory was bitter. His hands, stained with blood, seemed to tremble with the weight of the decisions he had made. He paused in front of a mirror, seeing a stranger staring back at him. Was he still the same man who had entered this world? He no longer knew. He had lost so much, yet somehow he had survived. But at what cost? His thoughts were interrupted by the faint scent of Elena's perfume, lingering in the empty house, a cruel reminder that some things would never return. A soft knock on the door broke the stillness. Michael turned, his heart racing, but the room was empty. His breath caught in his throat. Elena's face appeared in his memory again, vivid as if she were still here. Her voice echoed in his mind. "You have to finish this, Michael, for both of us." His hands clenched as the memory of her final moments pierced through him. He walked to the window, staring out at the city below, the world moving on without him. "I will," he whispered, more to himself than to the memory. The silence of the room felt like her presence, an invisible bond between them. She was gone, but her spirit lingered, urging him forward. The grief, the loss, it was all still fresh, but in that pain, there was clarity. He could feel her guiding him, pushing him to make the world right, even if it meant facing the consequences alone. The door creaked open, and Michael entered the study, where he had once sat with his mentor, Giovanni, the man who had taught him everything about power, loyalty, and survival. The old chair sat empty now, but Michael could still hear Giovanni's voice, calm and reassuring. "You must always choose the path that keeps you true to yourself, Michael." He had not understood it then, but he understood it now. The lessons Giovanni had imparted were not about loyalty to the Empire. They were about loyalty to himself, to what he believed in. Michael ran his hand over the old desk, remembering the countless hours they had spent together. The pain of loss was still sharp, but now Michael felt a sense of peace. Giovanni had died for his beliefs, but in the end, Michael would live for his. He would not become what everyone expected him to be. He would honor his mentor by forging a new path, one that was his own. The world had shifted, and so had Michael. He stood at the edge of the same city he had once tried to control, now a place of quiet reflection. The Empire was gone, the bloodshed over, and with it, his past. "So this was the truth all along," he whispered, his voice steady, though his heart still ached. He had lost so much, yet here he stood, not as a broken man, but as one who had found a new purpose. There was no going back, no undoing what had been done. But there was something ahead, something he could still fight for. "I can't change the past," he thought, "but I can shape what comes next." Michael turned away from the city, a new strength in his steps. The future was uncertain, but for the first time it was his to control. He had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. The world was still. The city below, once teeming with life, now felt distant, muted in the morning light. Michael stood by the window, looking out over the skyline, but his eyes saw nothing. The emptiness of the world outside mirrored the emptiness inside him. Elena, Giovanni, his father, all gone. The Empire was nothing but a memory now, a shadow fading into the past. Michael's fingers rested on the windowsill, but the coldness of the glass couldn't numb the ache in his chest. What had he truly gained? The victory felt hollow, like a song without a melody. The loss had been so much greater than the life he had fought to preserve. And yet, as the sun rose higher, Michael knew something inside him had changed. The weight of the past had lifted, but what remained was not freedom, but something more fragile: peace. The world would never be the same, but neither would he. The question lingered: was it worth it? The door clicked shut behind him. Michael took a final glance at the mansion, its silhouette barely visible in the soft light of morning. Everything he had once known was contained within those walls, but now, there was no turning back. The path before him was clear, not easy, but clear. He walked away, each step forward symbolizing a release. The weight of the past had been too much to carry, but now he was leaving it behind. There was no more empire to fight for, no more family to protect. What he had lost was irretrievable, but the man walking away from it all was no longer the same. With each step, he was becoming someone new. The question remained: what would he do with the future? Michael didn't have an answer, but for the first time in his life, he felt free to find it. As Michael walked away from the ruins, a familiar voice echoed in his mind. Giovanni had always said, "Strength is not measured by what you can destroy, but by what you can forgive." The words rang in Michael's ears as if Giovanni were still standing beside him. His mentor's voice had been a constant guide, a moral compass in a world built on lies. But now, Michael understood the deeper meaning of those words. Forgiveness wasn't just about letting others go. It was about letting himself go. He had spent too long carrying the weight of others' sins. The Empire, the betrayals, the bloodshed, It was all part of the past now. The future lay in his hands, and for the first time he was ready to accept it, without the ghosts of what had been. The days blurred together, each one blending into the next as the world moved on without him. The city continued to pulse with life. New faces, new challenges, but Michael had changed. The weight of the empire, the pain of betrayal, and the loss of those he loved had reshaped him. He no longer sought power or control. The streets he once ruled were now just a backdrop to his own personal journey. The man he had been was gone, and in his place was someone who had learned the cost of truth. He had found peace in letting go, in accepting the world as it was, not as he had wished it to be. The world had moved on, but he had finally caught up with it. As Michael reached the edge of the city, he paused and turned, his gaze lingering on the horizon. A faint smile crossed his face, the first since the storm had passed. He had made his peace with the past, and now he could move forward. Truth must never be owned, he whispered, the words resonating like a final echo of everything he had endured. The empire was gone, the ghosts of the past had faded, and Michael was no longer defined by what had happened. He was free to choose his own path, and for the first time he was at peace. The journey had been long and painful, but it had brought him here, to this quiet, still moment of acceptance. And with that, he turned his back on the city, walking into the unknown, but with no fear in his heart.